Thank you everyone for joining How to Set Up Your Learning Pod 101. This is Waine Tam from Selected, and we'll get started. So that's me. I'm the CEO of Selected, and we'll talk about Selected as well as our new service Selected for Families. And also joining us today is Alex Thorson. She is our Director of Community at Selected.
Hello, everyone.
And sure. And so just a little bit about Selected. First of all, for those who do not know Selected, we actually historically have been matching and hiring platform for schools and teachers for K through 12 schools, public and private, really in the Northeast, California, Arizona, and Texas. And based on really demand from parents over the past month, and their interest in accessing teachers, we are opening up access to the same pool of teachers that we've historically offered to K through 12 schools to parents, and that will happen this week, actually. So we're really excited about that. And so I assume that's why many people are here to learn about Selected for, of course, how to set up your learning pod, but also Selected for Families. And so as part of Selected for Families, we have over 30,000 teachers who are registered to Selected and hopefully accessible via with families or by families. They're experienced. These are professional teachers that have been in the classroom. Over 70% have 2+ years of work experience. The vast majority are certified, have their master's in education. These are professional teachers. And so right now, again, we serve the Northeast US, from New York to DC, California, Northern and Southern California, parts of Texas, and parts of Arizona, with more regions to come. So definitely, if your area is not served included in those areas, definitely let us know. You can sign up at families.getselected.com to join the invite list, which those folks on the invite list will be added or really allowed to sign up essentially for our service starting this week. And finally, 10% of all the fees as part of Selected Families will go to our grant program that we offer to help high need schools recruit teachers as part of our Selected platform. So that's us. And we'll get on with how to set up your learning pod. So first, as by way of introduction, I'm sure many people know how to use Zoom. If you can access the chat feature at the bottom of your screen and just type in where you're calling in from, city, state, so folks have a good sense of where everyone's from. All right, LA, Brooklyn, I know we're gonna get a lot of New York City representation. California, Texas, Houston, awesome. Cool. Well, welcome everybody. Yeah. Oh, Germany even. So a lot of Texas, a lot of East Coast, West Coast. Cool. Okay. So it's just as people enter in their location and state, just some kind of rules of the road for participation. Use the Zoom chat. Please ask questions, comments, affirm other folks. We will have polls and Q&A throughout the presentation. As you have questions, as I'm speaking, as Alex is speaking, definitely fire away any questions you have, any questions that you have. I'm sure other people have. So that's the point. That's the whole point of this webinar. Also, the prepared remarks here is but probably maybe half an hour of discussion. The rest of the time, we've allocated a full hour to this. So to the extent that there are more questions, let's try to get them answered with the remainder of the time. So it's really a time for you to get your specific questions answered. In terms of follow-up, we will email notes. We'll share this presentation, additional resources, and also any answers to questions that were left unanswered at the end of this. We'll include in a follow-up email. Our blog has a lot of answers, especially related to the topics that we're going to cover today. And also, if you have any specific questions about our service or in general, any needs that you have that you don't see satisfied, email families@getselected.com. Okay, so our agenda today, 5 core items. One is basically sharing back to you our key data and learnings from the families who have reached out to us about Selected for Families. I think it's instructive for other families to know what they're all looking for, so you know that you're not alone in this, and that we're all here to help. That's one. Second, we'll cover the basics. Third, the working arrangement. That is highly variable within families and teachers as well. And the reason and why we're talking about this is because, of course, figuring out within your pod, but also the other party, which is the teacher, and making sure that aligns with what the teacher needs as well. Compensation, which is a big topic of conversation for the teacher and the families while paying that compensation. And of course, finally, we have health and safety. So what over 500 households have said to us so far and more is that roughly 50% are looking at pods versus their individual household. That percentage continues to rise. Initially, when we started our service, the vast majority were actually individual households. So our suspicion is that as individual households talk and or realize kind of the work and expenses involved in this, they're reaching out to other families for support, and of course other aspects such as socialization. Other common characteristics that we've heard from the 500 households is that is duration, that most are seeking at least the first semester of podding or help from a teacher. So that's, you know, up and basically through January, and we'll talk about why that matters, of course. But at least covering the first semester, vast majority, most are looking for part-time supplementation to remote learning, meaning if what most families are saying, okay, if my child, if school's opening and it's safe and my kid can go to school, and then they're going to school and they're going to be in school. If not, and they're at home for remote learning, I need help essentially to support them at home. So that's the kind of largest use case, so to speak, for hiring a private teacher or podding. And also a large number of, or high percentage of families are keeping their child enrolled in the same school they were in the spring. And continuing in the fall, and of course, again, using podding to learning pods to supplement the remote learning. The children are typically of elementary age or younger. Not so surprising there because it's more challenging, of course. We don't want to be, you know, adults don't want to be on Zoom meetings for 6 hours a day or 4 hours, or really more than 2 to 3. And so you can imagine elementary age kids or younger to do that as well. We see fewer kind of middle and high school, but there definitely are there. And so it covers a broad, of course, spectrum, but most are elementary age and younger. And then in terms of priorities from families, it's what you might imagine and probably why you're here: academic progress, making sure the child stays on track, health and safety, because you have a smaller number of students in your pod or just your family, as well as socialization. So maintaining at least some semblance of school socialization. And finally, what households have said is that they value teachers. They value their education degree. They value the certification that professional teachers have, and that's usually very highly regarded. So that's just the summary of kind of what we've seen so far. Hopefully that's helpful and just giving you a lay of the land. Okay, so the basics. Essentially, you're making the decision: are you podding up with others? And what number of children are involved. Of course, the trade here, the reason why you pod up is because of cost and the value of socialization, I believe. The trade there is, of course, just the complexity of managing the number of families, children, making sure the lines of communication are open and everyone's synchronized as it relates to health and safety, among other issues that we'll talk about. But of course, this is why you're here. Grade levels is a big consideration. It's most beneficial to cluster in adjacent grade levels. So if you have second and third graders, that's fine. Even second and fourth could be fine if, say, the second graders performing above their grade level. So it's more like a third and fourth grade. Adjacent is ideal. The same is actually more, of course, same is ideal. And then as you get further away, that's less ideal. So just to think about that, because to the extent that they're really far apart, let's say first and fifth grade or second and fifth grade, second and sixth, that really impacts the way the teacher can manage the classroom, and also, of course, the learning demands of very different children, very different grade levels. Another basic consideration, of course, is just are you staying enrolled in school? This impacts the function of the teacher you hire. To the extent that they stay in school, that curriculum will be school provided, so the teacher can leverage and will likely lean on and use the curriculum provided by the school because that's what your child is tracked on, versus them designing something from scratch. So just something to consider, to the extent that you're staying in school, that could be valuable for the teacher to know, actually very valuable for them to know, and because that'll impact the way they teach your students, teach your kids. Okay, so next topic is working arrangement. And this is important because it's highly variable. It's highly variable. This is probably the area that has the most, it just takes a lot of it takes time to work out. And also it's important because it impacts the way, how you recruit for teachers and ultimately how you will negotiate with them to contractually agree to work with your household. So one is, of course, duration, and how long this work arrangement will last. It could be a quarter, it could be a semester. We see a lot of folks opting for a full academic year. Again, it really depends on your view. I think a lot of it depends on your view of COVID, essentially. If to the extent you think that this will last through January and February, I mean, you're already into the second semester. So, that dictates a lot of what you may be thinking about, particularly if health and safety is a priority. Again, as we discussed in the beginning and what we've heard from over 500 households, a majority of families are looking for at least a full semester term. So again, that brings you through January. The value, of course, the trade here is, again, there's always a trade. The trade is cost and how much you can afford. The value of doing a full academic year or even just any longer term arrangement, not just duration, but also just number of hours, for example, is that it will make it easier to recruit a teacher. You have to remember that what they're, and we'll talk about this, but what they're giving up, of course, is a guaranteed annual contract, right? They're leaving potentially a full-time job to do potentially a part-time one. We're trying to piece things together. So duration and consistency really matters for not only for your family, but also for recruiting teachers. And duration is, again, just one part of the working arrangement. It's also the number of hours per week, and thinking about your needs, if it's part-time or full-time, and what you really need. If you're thinking, we can talk about the kind of the ends of the spectrum. The far end of the spectrum is you need a full-time replacement, that you want someone there full-time, you're taking your child out of school, or you expect the school to be 100% remote the whole school year or something, that you need someone on site and potentially doing not only custom curriculum, but potentially additional enrichment activities. Of course, that's full-time. The other end of the spectrum is just someone a couple hours a day for a couple hours a week. That's bordering almost like serving as a tutoring function. So maybe this a kind of a pod or a private teacher may not necessarily be needed there. In the middle is, probably the biggest use case, where it's maybe 20-ish hours, kind of a part-time supplement to remote learning. It's hard because who knows where remote learning goes in terms of right now it's 100%. What if that goes down to 20% or a day a week? What does that happen? What happens to your arrangement? Those are all things that you would need to work out with your teacher. One thing that we recommend is potentially, one thing that we not just suggest is exploring just maybe a kind of a retainer model, like for example, guaranteeing minimum hours that you can, that basically you lock in for your teacher during a period of time. Because at the same time, while you may think, okay, remote learning is not always going to be 100%, but to the extent that there's someone falls ill at the school and the school has to shut down, well, then it went from 0% remote to 100% remote overnight, right? So as we know, things are highly unpredictable these days. So something that guarantees you security, both in terms of hours per week and duration, could be really valuable. Finally, in terms of hours per week, don't forget that teachers also spend a significant amount of time outside of the pod, or not just or outside the classroom, or outside of just the teaching function, to prepare, to lesson plan, to potentially grade, to just get ready. And so that often may not be accounted for if you just look at kind of a straight hours per week in your home. They're definitely, guarantee you, they're definitely doing work outside of the time at home or in the school. All right, compensation. So baseline, our recommendation and suggestion is to be more than competitive. I'm sure folks are trying to figure out average teaching salary as a starting point, but baseline being more than competitive with that. Generally, the information around average teaching salaries is publicly available. If you dig around the internet, you can see kind of the of your local district. If you're a public school district, you can see the comp schedule. It's usually based on year's salary, or sorry, years of experience, and also degree or additional certifications that they have. It's of course varies highly, it varies significantly city by city, state by state, even district by district within the same city. So that's why this is complicated. That's why it's hard. But baseline is you get a sense of what the average teaching salary is. Be more than competitive with that, especially if you're looking for a part-time, which I think most people are. Again, as you might imagine, right, with any salary to kind of function, if it's part-time, you demand for more flexibility. You're going to pay a premium above just a simple kind of proration of salary, divided by 40 hours a week, divided by X months type of thing. Again, we talked about this early on. What do teachers lose? Of course, they gain a lot of things, and we can talk about that. What do teachers lose is from leaving their job. They lose their contract, benefits, and if they're in a school district, public school district, they lose access to a pension, or years that are years of experience that go towards kind of qualifying for that. They lose a team and support, and potentially kind of that structure of just kind of team support and from other teachers, and they're on their own with your pod, and potentially they lose a structured curriculum. Although if you're relying on the school district and your child is still in school, then at least you have that to support the teacher. What they also lose is outside of again, we talked about this also, is that teachers spend a lot of time prepping, lesson planning outside of the pod and classroom. Many teachers are traditionally focused on single grades, single grade levels. So if they're asked to teach multiple grades, potentially with a kind of a wide disparity between grade levels, that's a challenge for them. So those are things they lose. Of course, there are many benefits for them in a pod situation. Of course, one is just fewer kind of student count, health and safety benefits to them, and additional flexibility, even just with teaching style, being able to be flexible in and out of the kind of household or classroom, so to speak. So there's a lot of things that they do gain, but just to give a sense of what they actually lose. The final point about compensation is as much as we can speculate about what you should put out as or offer as compensation, as with everything or most things, it's really supply and demand. And this is where it gets challenging, because that's why this is highly variable between regions. It's dependent on the cost of living. It's dependent on just demand from parents. And of course, there is right now significant interest among parents. And so you should expect to pay more generally based on flexibility that you demand from the teacher, the qualifications of that teacher. If you have the more requirements, say it's a world language fluency, if it's a specific curriculum, such as say Singapore math or Montessori, kind of these more specialized areas, you will pay more. And also timing, as we head closer to the start of the school year, as you would imagine, prices are going to go up. To answer this question more directly, we don't have one in terms of baseline compensation for you to we can't recommend that right now. What we will do as we have more families use our site, and I mentioned that will be launched, that service will start this week. We will share back with you the data that we're seeing in different regions, and what you can generally see from other parents that are essentially what the market looks like, and we'll share that in a future blog post. So definitely stay tuned. We're really interested as well, because again, as much as you can speculate, we can sit here and speculate, it's really going to be based on supply and demand. I think this is the final topic. The final topic is related to health and safety. So critical to all of this, and this is likely one of the reasons why you're even thinking about a pod in the first place, is health and safety, and making sure that you align on health and safety. There's a couple things to think about. Of course, the risk tolerance, the COVID risk tolerance of So one question about, just going real quick back to compensation, that is per child, correct? Yeah. So thank you for clarifying that, Helen. You can expect to pay more per additional child. It's not linear. It's not like one kid is 20 an hour and then two would be 40. But I would expect a modest increase or some appreciation based on the number of children in the pod. And as the pod gets larger, it just becomes more complex to manage. So that's the other consideration, that the price for 10 students in a pod could be very different than 2 or 3. But as a baseline, right, it seems like most people, and our general advice is, 40 to 50 is probably a good starting, 40 to 50 an hour is a good starting point. And again, it would not surprise me that rates can and will go much higher than that per hour, especially if you have multiple students in a pod. Back to health and safety. So you're welcome, Helen. So risk tolerance is important. Of course, making sure that everyone aligns with, say, mask wearing protocol, social distancing. If other families have, individuals in their household that potentially have compromised immune system or potentially are older individuals, syncing up on all these issues is important. We do have another blog post that talks about how to, that outlines some questions to ask, how to begin a conversation. What are those levels of risk tolerance that folks can talk about and abide and hopefully abide by? So it's one, again, making sure that everyone's of consistent risk tolerance, can agree to social behaviors. Of course, there will be no doubt differences of opinion, and especially as you kind of coordinate families. The challenge in that is, look, if you can't align or don't align, you can't force it. People, that's the way it is. But the point is really to communicate, because even after the agreement, this needs to be a constant dialogue over time, particularly as the situation with COVID changes, the schools around you change. Maybe some students, I won't even go into that, but the situation will change. So communications shouldn't end even after you have some semblance of if you have agreement around behavior, social behavior, and health and safety. I think if someone gets ill, coming up with a policy of what happens, I think, and we can help think about that. I mean, the basic outline is essentially, if someone gets ill, the CDC has given shared guidelines of essentially what happens, what you should do. That just basically means take the person out of school or the pod. They're isolated until they get better. Of course, that's not surprising. I think the other thing to think about is what happens to the pod. Do you shut down most extreme is shutting down the pod for a period of time. There's a situation where you could say that some of the student that essentially shut down the pod for a couple days, do a cleaning, make sure, and then invite people back with a monitoring of their health, a close monitoring of health. Things like, there's of course degrees of freedom all over that. It's really your comfort level, but the point is, because there's so many degrees of freedom, coming up with that before, in advance, of course, of agreeing to a pod is critical. But we have, we'll share on our blog again. At the end, we'll share documentation of blogs that are blog articles that cover all of this. So, and finally, or not finally, but another point on health and safety is, don't forget about the teacher, in terms of what their needs are. For example, I'll ask. This will be part of the poll, but essentially, like, will the children be wearing masks? Does the teacher have a preference about what the students are doing, and/or is that one of your requirements, right? So those are things to just think about. Be mindful of the teacher as well. Of course, your family logically will be first in this equation, but also don't forget about the teacher and their needs. The other health and safety bucket is operations. Again, particularly when it's you're potting up, what happens, who's responsible for cleaning, If there's multiple hosts, is there one host family? Are you kind of rotating among your houses? How does that work? Uh, uh, again, is the host family just responsible for cleaning? Are you offering, single-use towels, things like that? Is there proper ventilation? When the weather's good, is there an understanding that most of the learning may take place outside? Things like that. Again, we have a checklist that can walk you through all of these kind of decisions to make. Temperature checks. Of course, we know that there may be asymptomatic carriers of COVID, but if there's a temperature check, is that just for the kids? Is it also for the parents? And is there lunch, etc.? So just operational. I bucketed under health and safety, but of course, operational issues to think about. At the end of our presentation, you can find more about all of these topics. So on our blog, it's families.getselected.com/blog. There's our checklist, the kind of DIY checklist that goes through the issues that we talked about here in addition to others. We also have another post around health and safety protocol, how to have those communications with other families, and we just launched additional articles around how to interview a teacher. So we're going to start a series on that. I know one lucky person is actually beginning the interview process, so maybe that will be helpful to you. But our hope is that more people continue down the path. You will have to interview a teacher. Of course, we can help out with that and offer that as a service for you. And of course, salary considerations. That's another article that we released this week, how to think about the considerations going behind the offering a teacher salary, understanding the issues behind that for the teacher. So that's our blog. You can go to our homepage, our families homepage at families.getselected.com. There's no www, just you can just type in families.getselected.com and our main site, which is, we got a lot of Get Selected all over here. So anyways, my email's there, Alex's email is there as well. We will again share this. We'll share this share the recorded video as well as the presentation. So I think there's another question. Sorry.
There is one, yeah.
One question. How do you determine which child is suitable for a specific pod?
Grade levels, ages, different, maybe like it's a student is higher than their grade level or falling a little bit below. This is something that we can help you with that if you want to hop on a call with us to talk about what that range is looking like. There are plenty of teachers who are able to handle a varying age group for students, but it is going to limit your pool size a little bit if you have a group that is a little more homogeneous, so closer clumped together by grade levels. It opens up your pool of strong candidates greatly. So that's one thing. And then it's also something, as you're talking to teachers, you can kind of figure out. We've been working with families who have the majority of their pod falling within a grade level or two, and then one student who is like a kindergarten level, and the rest were upper elementary. So they're now trying to figure out if they want a second pod to be put together with more kindergartners, or if that is something a teacher can handle. So if that is that one. And then, so yes, so depending on what specific needs a child would have, classroom teachers are also expected to handle different learning disorders, ADHD, things like that within their classroom. But if there is attention that is needed from like a special education teacher, you're probably going to want to look for a special education teacher who could work with your pod. And we have special education teachers on our site who are open to doing that. So that's also an option for you. Yes, so number of students in a pod, you're probably going to want to stay maxing out at about 10. If you're over by 1 or 2, a teacher might be able to take that on. But you also want to think through if it's 10 students who are all 4th graders, that's very different than 10 students who are grades kinder through 5th. So when you're playing with numbers there, also think about how different the needs are of the students within that pod.
Mm-hmm. For Iris, we stay tuned. We'll definitely be able to help parents looking for other parents. Not right now, but that's something that's definitely on our mind.
Yeah, Wayne, do you want to tackle actual process here?
Oh man, no, the questions are coming in. Okay, what is the actual process that you undertake to help match um, families with teachers? So there's a couple things. So right now, what we offer is, or what we will launch likely tomorrow, is a self-service option on selected where parents or families can log in. You will see those teachers who have opted into an in-home arrangement and be able to filter for the characteristics that you're looking for. So inclusive of grade level, subject expertise, things, certification, education level, things like that. In terms of, so that's that's essentially, we call it a standard search model. In addition to that, to the extent that you're looking for more support, so let's say you want to write a custom, job description, or your profile on selected, a family profile on selected, to make it more palatable or more interesting, say, to a teacher, we can help you with that. We can actually run the search for you. Um, and if you don't want to do that, we will certainly help. These are, of course, there are additional support options that you would have to pay for, all the way up to a full service, which is if you just want to tell us just kind of, and we'll walk through your assessment, and you want to tell us the primary characteristics of what you're looking for, and just leave it to us, do the search, do the interviewing, do the background checks, basically do everything, but just deliver you final round candidates. We can do that as well. So we can run the whole range of services to match families with teachers, but to just get started, soon you'll be able to go right in and be able to filter and search for teachers directly. So legal considerations for a pod. I think the primary consideration, I think there's probably two. One is just health and safety, in terms of what liability you take on to the extent that someone is ill. I think I do not rely on us for legal advice. I think that's something that you would have to consult a lawyer. What we've seen, however, are waivers that families can sign that kind of relieve everyone of liability, particularly if there are multiple host families. The other legal consideration is around just general liability. So injuries, accidents in your home that generally may not be covered under the if you have an umbrella policy or a home, just an umbrella liability policy for your home. I would just check to make sure that that is covered, or there's some coverage there, but that's just something to look into. So I'd say those were the two biggest legal considerations.
Yeah, and I think for some families it feels funny to do that because a lot of the pods are people they know well, but I would strongly consider looking into that because it can be something as simple as kids outside playing catch and one gets hit in the head with a baseball or something, and you just don't know. So to have some sort of liability in there for especially the host family is going to be something you're going to want to take a look at. Okay, Betty's question here on, yes. So it would be realistic for a teacher to work with school admins on school-based curriculum. And I think what you would want to do there is whatever organization you have to do with the school, and then just make that a part of your job description when you're looking for teachers so that the teacher knows what they're getting into, and then make it a part of the interview process. Again, you can email us and we can help you kind of figure out what that looks like. But if that's something that you need, you can expect that of a teacher. Just know that it may increase or decrease your pool size depending on what you're expecting of the teacher. You will be able to search for pre-K and Montessori trained teachers on the site.
Mm-hmm. I think Rena submitted that question already. Wanda White, do pods ever run in daycare license issues if they're spending? I'm actually not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah, me neither. Not on that one.
I'm wondering if there's, I don't even want to kind of speculate. I'm wondering if there's a difference between just this is your private home and it's not a business. But I
Or
don't
number
necessarily
of
want to speculate
children
on.
that you have to be registered
Yeah,
as a daycare.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm not sure on that one.
I'm
I'll look
trying to
into it.
be.
If I find it, I'll let
Yeah,
you
we'll
know.
look. It's a great question, one.
Yeah.
We'll look into that. I'm trying to be sure that the key students I'm planning to work with receive full credit for their grade. Alex, do you?
Yeah, so Allison, this depends a little bit too. So a lot of families, I think this is a big reason families are wanting to stay with the virtual instruction in the schools that they're enrolled with. So you have that piece of not wanting to lose a spot with the school, if that's a concern for you. You also have the issue of wanting to be able to come back at any point that the school opens back up again. So that's an issue for families. But I think the other one is making sure that children, regardless of their grade level, receive credit for everything that they're doing there. And so if you want a teacher to completely replace school, you're going to start looking at some of the guidelines for homeschooling and what does that look like when you're transferring back to school. But if they're going to continue to do the virtual learning and you're hiring a teacher to manage the completion of virtual instruction and then add to what the school has provided, the student is getting credit for that virtual instruction with the school. And so they're taking care of everything that needs to happen there and moving students forward. So as long as your child is still enrolled, you shouldn't have to worry about that. It's more if, again, you're going to use this to replace school altogether, that you need to look into it a little more. And that could also be as simple as calling the schools your students would be enrolled in and finding out what that process is like to transfer them in. And it's different school to school. It could be a test that they have to take. It could be like a portfolio of assignments.
I'm going to launch. We're going to take questions, continue questions. I'm just going to launch the final poll actually, which is just a question around what resources do you need most, and your answer to this will be extremely helpful for us to focus on the areas that you need most help in. So I'm just going to launch that poll so folks can respond. That'd be really helpful. What's the next question? Pia, should a pod teacher be expected to grade students?
So that one is very similar. If you have a teacher, yes, the answer is yes. But if you have your kids still doing virtual instruction, the teacher doing that virtual instruction with the school will be grading those assignments and planning for those assignments. Your teacher would be grading and planning for any of the enrichment or remedial lessons and activities you want them to do with your kids. If you are asking the teacher to replace school, yeah, they're grading and they're lesson planning, and they should have a strong sense of how to use data to plan for whatever is coming next, whether it's tomorrow's lesson or the next unit down the line. So yes, they should be able to tell you where your kids are at. You should be able to have conversations with them just like you would a teacher working in a school around extra help, maybe that you want to provide in the evenings or weekends, where your students are at, if your child is falling behind or if they're way ahead and we need to now do different enrichment to make sure they continue to stay ahead. You can expect that of a teacher, and you should. And then are pods expected to have an adult from the host family home? No, that's up to you as well. We have families where the adults will be in the home. We have families where adults are planning to be in the room. And then we have adults who are saying, no, I am hiring this teacher because I have to go do my work and I need someone to be there as the supervisor of my kids during that time. So that's up to you. And it's something you're also going to want to ask your teacher, because that's another thing to keep in mind is just the teacher's liability and comfortability with that as well. Where in the house is the teacher with kids? How many kids? Alone in a room with a kid, 1 or 2 kids, you're going to have teachers who aren't comfortable with that. And it could be as simple as a solve of like, well, it'll be in the living room then instead, or yes, there's just a parent right next door in the next room. So those are things to think about. Okay. Give me a second just to read these questions as they come in. Yeah, so Betty, this piece on possibly hiring full-time, this is going to be another spot where you're going to have to take some cues from the teachers that you're interviewing with, because if you want them to be flexible enough to take that on, back to what Waine was saying earlier about potential retainer fees, you don't want to lose that teacher. And if teachers are doing things part-time and working for more than one family, they could have overlapping commitments there as well. So that's something you would want to bring up at the start. And then other issues just to think about in that is if you're planning on doing, I would almost do similar to like a pros and cons sheet. Think of this as like, what requirements and qualifications do you need of a teacher who is supporting virtual learning? And what else do you actually need if you're expecting them to just replace school altogether? And you're probably going to want to start looking for those teachers who are qualified to replace school altogether in case you're going to need that. So similarly, if you would want a certified special education teacher, if they were going to replace what was happening with the school, I would strongly source for special education teachers from the get-go versus having to then resource at some point in the year. Oh, these are great bullet points. Thank you for sharing this too.
Mm-hmm. Surveillance cameras, they haven't come up, although that's something to, teachers haven't expressed a concern about that. But
schools have them too. Lots of classrooms have cameras in them. I would just probably say you have a camera. I don't think that should be an issue.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I think disclosing it is fine, but
yeah.
I'm sure it's not an issue for them. From Wanda, are facilities other than home suitable for pods, such as I believe the church? Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we've heard everything from even kind of an office. It could be an office setting. One family that we've been talking to, they don't have a lot of space. The apartments are very small, and so actually using an office that is currently being unoccupied as an option for sure.
Yep.
Okay.
Great questions, everyone.
Great. Oh, Lori, should parents be expected to provide materials or the teacher?
Parents. Unless you are going to give the teacher a budget to purchase materials that they need. There are certain things too where they might have it. Like you could have a teacher who says, oh, I have a curriculum. I've done an entire unit on these different things. I have all of the worksheets, handouts, materials like that. A teacher could probably provide. But if you're asking them to actually supply things for students that would be found in a classroom, you're going to want to be able to provide those for the teacher's use. Cool.
Should we hire the teacher hourly or as an employee, pay health insurance? For this one, it depends, I guess, on the number of hours that you do, that you intended to pay the teacher. And this kind of characterization varies state by state. I think again, you're not relying on us for legal advice or tax advice, but I think the general guidance is that, at least as it relates to caregivers, so nannies and similar positions where you're defining a lot of the rules of employment, that very likely falls under classification as an employee. And so there are implications of that as it relates to taxes, but there's services out there that help you manage that, Ella. Health insurance, I mean, it's kind of an individual conversation with the teacher. What I will say is that what we've heard from parents, most are not, or families are, most are not offering insurance. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't, but that can also be something that's embedded into the salary so that it's not this kind of separate administrative kind of operational thing you have to do. But
yeah, I would also think of the health insurance as your own family's needs. If you're doing this because you want to make sure your family is safer than they are in school, you probably also want to ensure that your teacher has health insurance and takes all of that very seriously. So that's something else to consider when you're weighing what you're hoping to pay them, whether that's as an employee with that benefit or just adding a little on to the hourly so that when they are paying for their own health insurance, you're kind of subsidizing some of that a little bit.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Emergency exits. That one I don't know. Wayne, do you know on that one?
I don't know. I imagine that is very kind of state by state rule, that kind of regulation, but that's a great question. That's something that we can look into. I don't know.
Yeah.
Wanda, do you suggest contracts between teachers and parents or a set of expectations rules clearly defined in writing? What I would say is both. I mean, I think to kind of, meaning to just start the conversation and to get something on paper as a framework of how we're going to work together. I think a set of expectations and rules, yes, absolutely. I think that's very important to just make sure everyone's on the same page, not just within the teachers, not between teachers and parents, but also, of course, among families within the pod. In terms of a contract between a teacher and a parent, yes, because that will define essentially engagement, what you're paying them. Do they have vacation days? How do you calculate? Is there a termination date? Do you have a quarterly renewal, semester renewal? All these kind of things that go into employment contracts, or even part-time. You'll have to iron out in the contract. If you think you don't need a contract, then that's of course on you to decide. But I would recommend that.
Yeah, I think it's going to help the teacher too, like their decision. There are a lot of teachers who are very eager right now to leave the school setting because of just the chaos that is including this year. But to make that choice, they're also going to want to know they're secure in the decision that they're making, even if that's just through now and December, just to know what they're getting into as they're weighing, do I leave my current contracted position to take on a different contracted position with a family?
Yeah. And I think that's and Alex, you bring a great point, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, teachers are used to this. I think anyone who has has a salaried position is comfortable, more familiar with having a contract of employment. So I think that would also lend to just a general feeling of security, safety with working with the family.
Yeah, and examples here, we're working on getting a couple of examples that we can share out with folks.
Yeah.
If you need something faster than that, you could talk to a school or a teacher if you know any to see what they do, but we're working on some.
All right, everyone. Thank you for your time. As you have more questions, definitely send them to us. We're at families@getselected.com. You can email us there. We will have future webinars related to how to set up your learning pod. This is 101. This is kind of the highest level, and we'll likely have more that dig into specific issues. But definitely let us know if you have additional questions. That will help us identify where we can focus our efforts on to help you. Alex sent our email to the group chat. Mine I'll send as well if I can do that. I'm actually not sure. I can't, but it's just my first name, WAINE, at getselected.com. You can see on the slide. And yes, we'll send out the recording as well. or we'll put it up on the web so you can access it. Okay, and also the presentation. And access our blog. A lot of the stuff is on there as well, so definitely feel free. And do you have emails? Do you have our emails? Yes, we have everyone's email, so you'll be notified of future events, and also and a newsletter and things like that. So yeah, everyone's good. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for your time.